kind of wrestling with this word all week. I'm still not sure what all God wants to say today. So, in 2 Kings chapter 5, in the Sunday schools that I grew up in, this was one, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, but this was, I think, my Sunday school teachers, plural, favorite stories. I heard this story a lot when I was a kid for some reason. I'm not sure. It was just a favorite. And the story of Naaman. Y'all know who Naaman is?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you know Naaman. Naaman. Okay. Naaman, in 2 Kings chapter 5, was the commander of the army of the king of Aram, or Syria. Aram is Syria. And Aram, Syria, was at this point one of the most, if not the most powerful countries in the known world at that time. It was, it had powerful military. They had conquered a lot of lands, and Naaman was the commander of the army of the king. So he was a big man in a big man's world. It says he was, in verse 1, it says he was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Naaman was a big man in a big man's world. You always hear, you were a big fish in a little pond. He was a big fish in a big pond. Not a whole lot of those. He was the favorite of the king. He had, not only was he a big man in a big man's world, but he had earned his position. It wasn't a position that was given to him, or that he had sort of connived or manipulated his way into. He had earned the right to be the commander of the king's army. And he was highly respected. He had a lot of people looked up to him. And he was a big man in a big man's world, but he had leprosy. He had a disease that there was no cure for. He was a very powerful man, but he couldn't defeat the leprosy. And we are living in a world that is being consumed by leprosy. Back then, there was no cure for leprosy. It was a horrible disease. It was a disease that was actually, it was worse than dying. It was sort of like living death, because it didn't kill you right away. It took a while to do it. And because there was no cure for it, because there was no, once you got it, there was no way to get rid of it. And it was very visible. It would literally eat your skin away. It would eventually, it would start to, it would consume your body from the outside in, sort of, and you would start to lose fingers and toes, and maybe your nose and your ears. And the only thing they knew to do with it was to keep you away from everybody else, to isolate you. So not only did you have this horrible disease that was very disfiguring and just a horrible thing, but you weren't allowed to be around people. You had to isolate. You were required by law. Most cultures, most societies, nobody knew what to do with it, and it crossed all boundaries. There was no way like you could get away from it. No matter how much money you had, you were susceptible to it. No matter what gender you were, young, old, didn't matter what your ethnic background was, everybody was susceptible to it. And everybody dealt with it the same way. If you got leprosy, you were pretty much required to go live by yourself, to isolate. If you did happen to come into society or have contact with somebody, you were required by law in most cultures and society to yell out and holler out as loud as you can, "Stay away from me, I'm unclean." Well, it was just a horrible thing. And Naaman, one of the most powerful men in the world, one of the biggest men in the world, had leprosy. He was unclean. He had this terrible wasting disease, and for which there was no cure. And so Aram, in verse 2, it says, Syria had some raiders from Syria had gone out, and on one of their raids they had captured a little girl that they brought back into captivity. And this young girl was from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She was Naaman's wife's servant girl. And the little girl, when she found out about Naaman's leprosy, said, boy, if my master would just go to Israel and see the prophet. There's a prophet in Israel who could do something about this horrible disease, about this thing that was destroying this powerful man. And we live in a time like that.
Yes.
We have all the technology and all the power in the world. We have all of the intelligence that technology can provide, but our culture, our society, our world is literally being eaten alive by corruption, and it's just a horrible wasting away disease. It's destroying. Leprosy destroyed everything it touched. And so the only thing they could do is try to keep people away from it and try to keep people from being touched by it, but it would literally, it would sweep through a town or a community if it was allowed to be exposed. And we are living in a day and an age when we have a disease and nobody knows what to do about it.
Yeah.
It's a leprosy, it's a cancer, it's a disease for which there is no cure. There's no cure for leprosy. Didn't matter that Naaman was one of the most powerful men in the world. Didn't matter because there was no cure. There was no fix for it. And I'm struggling with this word because I feel like I know who I'm talking to. I know I'm talking to powerful people. I know I'm talking to people that have big destinies, that have you're big men in a big man's world. And God wants us to God wants us to go deeper into Him, and He wants to invite us into a more intimate relationship with Him today. And it's a hard subject when you're talking to people who already know God. When you're talking to somebody who has already entered into a relationship with God and they've given God their whole heart. And I'm talking to people that are dealing with something that there's no cure for. There's no fix for it. And just like Naaman, the little servant girl told Naaman, there's hope for you. If you would just go to the prophet, if you would just go to the prophet in Israel, he might be able to help you out. He might be able to fix you. And so Naaman, because he was a big man in a big man's world, he went to the biggest man in the big man's world. He went to the king. He had the conduit, if you will, or he had the ear of the king. And so he went to the king and he told the king, he said, you know I have leprosy, you know I have this horrible disease, there's no cure for it, there's no hope for me, but there's this little girl that serves my wife, and she told me there's a prophet in Israel, and if I would go to them, he might be able to help me. And so the king, being the king, thought, well, I will send a message to the king of Israel. And so the king, Naaman's king, sent the king of Israel a message and said, hey, I'm sending you my servant Naaman. This is my best guy, and I'm sending him to you because I want you to cure him. I want you to fix him. I want you to make this better. Now we see this a lot today. We see this going on. We see one king telling another king, or one big man telling another big man, I want you to fix this. Only there is no fix. There is no cure. There's no hope for what's literally destroying our culture, our society, our world. It's corruption, and it's vile, and it's evil, and it's literally destroying us. And it's not happening, this disease that is going on, and it comes in many forms. It comes in many ways. This all started, and God started speaking to me this word when I was talking to somebody that was dealing with anxiety. And I got so frustrated because I know that there are some really godly people that are dealing with this.
Yes.
It's a horrible thing.
Yes.
And it's just one thing, but there's a lot of God's people, good, I'm not talking about weak Christians. I'm not talking about people that are rebelling against God and they haven't given their heart to God. They haven't sought God. I'm talking about people that have spent a good deal of time seeking God, and they walk with God. They know God. Yes. But yet they have this horrible thing, this anxiety, God's people are dealing with depression. God's people are dealing with these horrible emotional issues.
Yeah.
And it's not just God's people, it's all people.
Yes.
And it's just one thing that is literally eating us up. It's destroying us. And what God showed me is that it's only going to get worse. And the reason it's going to get worse is because there's a concentrated effort. There's a planned attack to bring this on as many people as we can. There's people that are there's trillions of dollars that are basically on the table in dealing with this, in the treatment of it, not the cure, the treatment. Because there's a ton of money that is out there, that's sort of laying out there, and man has figured out how to make money off of this horrible thing.
Yes.
And it's not just anxiety, it's not just depression. There's other things that are equally as bad. And I don't have time to list them all and go into them all. This was the one that sort of triggered this word from God that I realized that it's just this horrible thing that there's no cure for. And it all goes back. It's a satanic, demonic attack on mankind.
It is.
And Satan has a plan, and he has activated this plan has been in place for years and years and years and years. It's not just something that's sprung out of nowhere. And everything that we see in the news, all of the fear, all of the anxiety, all of the stuff that we've been bombarded with for years now, has all been geared and planned to attack and deceive and literally cause this cancer, this leprosy that is literally eating us alive. And I know there's people in here that are dealing with stuff. Some of you are dealing with that very thing, anxiety. Some of you are dealing with depression. Some of you are dealing with broken families, broken children. Some of you are dealing with financial problems. Some of you are dealing with other issues. Some of you are dealing with other health issues. Some of you are dealing with, you checked all the boxes as I was reading them off. You're dealing with every one of them. And you're like, you've been pressing into God. You've been seeking God. And I'm so afraid that I'm gonna come across as mean or like some kind of religious thing today. But that's not what God wants to do today. But Naaman had this problem. He had this leprosy that was eating him alive, that he had no cure for. And so the king sends a message to the king of Israel. Hey, I'm sending my best guy to you, and I want you to heal him. I want you to fix him up. I want you to take care of him. So the king immediately goes into a panic. He says, I don't know, who am I? How am I supposed to cure this? How am I supposed to fix this guy? I don't have a cure for leprosy. I'm not God. I can't do anything with this guy. And so the king of Israel gets the message from the king of Aram. The king of Israel thinks that the king of Aram is just picking a fight with him. He's giving him a hopeless task. He's saying, hey, I'm bigger than you, and if you don't fix this, then that's going to give me an excuse to come into your country and just wipe you out, basically. Take all your stuff. So the king of Israel, he's like, what's going on here? And so the prophet, Elisha, thank you. Did I say Isaiah?
Yeah, I did.
Elisha, you know the story. So Elisha finds out about this. And we'll go down to verse 8. It says, when Elisha, not Isaiah, Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. He says, why have you torn your robes? What are you worried about? What's the big deal? He said, have this man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Remember, Naaman is a big man in a big man's world. He's expecting a big cure. He's expecting something fantastic to happen. Why else would he expect anything different? He's a big man. He's got a big destiny. He's got a big purpose in life. Like a lot of you in this room. You are a big man in a big man's world, and you got a big purpose and a big destiny. But Naaman was soon to find out that the cure, the help that he was seeking, was not going to be a spectacular thing. So he comes to Elisha's house. He stands out in front of Elisha's house, and he's expecting the prophet Elisha to come out and maybe make a big speech, wave his hand in front of him, pray a big, long King James prayer over him, and cast out the devil and deny this and all the things that we do. He's expecting this great big dog and pony show that we're so used to in our churches. They had the same churches back then that we have now. I think it was the same guys who were in charge of things back then because they did the same things. Or maybe the same guys are in charge now that were in charge back then. We're just doing the same things. So Naaman, being a big man in a big man's world, thinks there's going to be a big, spectacular church service. They're going to call all the neighbors together, going to hold a big tent meeting or whatever, have everybody come together. Naaman's going to stand up tall and proud, and the prophet's going to come out, stand up a little taller, a little prouder, and he's going to wave his hand over him, going to say some magic words and mumbo-jumbo stuff, and all of a sudden the leprosy's going to flitter off. Maybe there'll be some smoke and fire, and I don't know what all he was expecting, but he was expecting a big man's cure for a big man in a big man's world.
Yeah.
Instead, Elisha, the prophet, he doesn't even come to the door. He doesn't even come out and address Naaman himself. Instead, Elisha, it says, sent a messenger to say to him, you need to go down here to the Jordan River and wash yourself 7 times. And he says, then your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed. Here's the first positive part of the whole story, is there actually is a cure that's available. But it wasn't a cure that a big man in a big man's world wanted to hear. Instead, it was another servant. There's a pattern in this story. Naaman, a big man in a big man's world, with a big problem, is told by a little servant girl, hey, there's hope for you. They keep, Naaman, the big man in the big man's world, he keeps trying to bring his problem back into the world that he knows. He says, well, I'll go see the king. I'll go see the biggest man that I know. And this big man, he will send message to another big man, and this big problem's all going to be solved in this in the way that I'm used to doing it. It's going to be a big, spectacular thing. Yeah. Instead, Elisha sends another servant out and says, well, here's what you need to do. You need to go all by yourself and go down to this little rinky-dink little muddy creek that we call the Jordan River, and you need to wash yourself in the Jordan River. Naaman responds the way a lot of us respond. Because we all got big destinies. We all got big purposes. We all got big jobs to do. I am not denying the fact. Listen to me very carefully now. Every one of you is a big man in a big man's world. You have a big destiny. I don't care what the world thinks of you. I don't care how big you are in the eyes of anybody else. I'm telling you, let me say this again, you are a big man in a big man's world. You've got a big destiny. You've got a big purpose. And you've got a big job to do. You have been anointed. You've been called by God. Every person in this room. Every person in this room, look at me, you are a big man in a big man's world. You've got a big job, a big destiny, and don't think for a minute that this is not important for you. Yeah. Because if you're not careful, your big man in a big man's world is all of a sudden going to make you big in your own eyes. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be like Naaman. You're going to be thinking, oh, I got big stuff to do, so I need a big cure. I need a big spectacular. I need a big platform to stand on. I've got to be noticed by the world. Instead, the servant's going to come out and say, hey, you got a problem. Because even though you're a big man in a big man's world, every one of us is also dealing with leprosy. Yes. You got a problem that can't be cured. You can't fix it. You've tried to fix it. You've tried everything you know to fix it. Yes. You've tried everything that has come to you. You've tried some things that you knew weren't going to work, and you tried them anyway because you were desperate, and they didn't work. Right. You got leprosy. You got an uncurable, unfixable problem. And you're hanging on by the skin of your teeth, hoping that somehow there's going to be some kind of miracle cure for you that's going to fix your leprosy because you got a big job to do. And so the servant comes out, not the king, not even the prophet, not even the preacher, not even the guy that everybody in the world that looks at and says, oh, he's got a great big church, he's got a big pulpit, he's got everybody listening to him, he's got a huge television audience, he's on the radio every day, he's got a podcast, he's got all this stuff on the interweb, and he can, everybody knows this guy's name. Maybe you're hoping, this Tuesday night or whatever, you're going to go to the down to the crusade, and the famous preacher is going to stand up, and he's going to wave his hand over you, and this problem is going to go away. Instead, the servant comes out and says, you got to go and wash yourself in the Jordan River. Because look what happens with Naaman. When Naaman gets told this, he's not excited about it. He says in verse 11, Naaman went away angry and said, oh, I thought the prophet would come out, and he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord, and there would be a big smoke and fire, and there'd be this good thing. And his God, and then he would wave his hand over the spot, and bang, bang, boom, the leprosy would be gone, because that's what you think's going to happen. Instead, he sends me down to wash in this muddy river. He says they're not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus. He said they're nice, clean rivers. They're nice, big, flowing, clean. Everybody, they're famous rivers. He said they're much more cleaner and better than all the water in Israel. He says, why would I do this? Why would I lower myself? I'm a big man in a big man's world. I'm not sure why I keep saying that, but he said, couldn't I go wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and he went off in a rage. He had no intention of doing this. He was mad. Number one, understand something. He had a serious problem.
Yes.
He didn't come into this thing on top of the world. He was already scraping the bottom of the barrel. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You've been there. You know what it's like to be desperate. He came desperate. He came with his hand out, which was already a tough thing for him to do. But he didn't have any other options. He didn't have any other choices. It was bad enough he had to listen to the servant girl. And then he was trying to get back into the real world where he lived and think, boy, if I could just go to the king will tell the other king, and so forth and so on. So he comes to the prophet, and so instead of the prophet coming out, another servant comes out, another nobody. Says, hey, you got to go take a bath in the dirty creek. He says, well, I ain't doing that. Says, I'll go home and wash in my own river, take a bath in my own tub, whatever. But notice what happens then. Another servant steps up. Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, now here's the thing. If the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? See, we're all willing to do whatever the big thing is that's required of us to fulfill our destiny, to be big, to do big things. But God is saying us today, I don't need us. I don't need you to do something big. I need you to take a step back and humble yourself. I need you to think less of yourself. I need you to become obedient. Now here's why I struggled with this week, because I'm telling people that are already obedient as you can be, that you need to be more obedient. Because obedience and intimacy are two different sides of the same coin. We've got obedience and holiness. We've turned that into a contest. They did it back then. We do it today. We use obedience. We use the covenant that God wants to come with us, and we've turned that into a contest, or a way that I can use obedience as sort of like a measurement. So I compare myself to Craig, and I can be more obedient than Craig. I can find out all the things you're doing that I think are wrong. Well, I didn't tell nearly as many lies this week as what Craig told me. I didn't steal nearly as much stuff this week as I didn't covet as much stuff as what Craig coveted this week. Craig, and we do this with each other. We turn the obedience to God into a contest. And it's like, if I compare myself to every one of you, and I look around the room and I think, well, I'm just better than Dave because I know Dave struggled in this area and I didn't struggle in that area, so that makes me one step higher than Dave. The only problem is God isn't comparing me to Dave at all. God's comparing me to me. And what God is saying to us today is He's inviting us into intimacy with Him. But the doorway to intimacy with God is obedience. The door to Naaman's recovery was through obedience. Not doing some big thing. Not becoming great. Not accomplishing something fantastic. He was inviting Naaman into intimacy with him, and he was saying, if you become obedient, he had to go through 3 different servants to get the message to him, and he kept coming back to the same thing. He says, you need to become obedient. And God today is inviting you in to deeper intimacy with Him. And the only way we can enter into that deeper intimacy is to greater obedience. Naaman swallows his pride, probably out of desperation, probably because he had tried everything else. Nothing had ever worked. He probably had gone to all the doctors in Aram, all the king's physicians, all of the well-known healers in his land, probably tried some different things, and everything that he knew to try, nothing had worked. There was no fix. And finally, out of desperation, he says, you know what? The servants finally convinced him, you ought to try it. What do you got to lose? And so Naaman goes down to the Jordan River. I wonder what it was like. Naaman, as he dipped himself once in the water, came back up, looked at his hands, his feet, they were still white with leprosy. Wonder if he tried to come out of the river. Say, this is stupid, this ain't gonna work. I dipped myself in the Jordan River, and then the servant said no. He said, you got to do it 7 times. And maybe finally, after the second or third thing and nothing was happening, maybe finally he said, you know what, I'm just going to get it over with as quick as I can. And just started boom, boom. And finally, after 7 times, he came up out of the water and the leprosy was gone.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
Naaman trots back to the prophet. Comes back to Elisha. And he's a new man. He said, now, in verse 15, I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. Even now, the prophet answers and says, as surely as the Lord lives whom I serve, as surely as there's a God in heaven that you just met, he says, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. God's not interested in what you bring to the table. I know this is a tough thing, but He doesn't need anything from you. He's not interested in your healing because you're a big man in a big man's world. Because in the kingdom, He doesn't need big people. He needs people that are obedient. He needs people that will seek after Him. He needs people that will chase after His heart. It's not a comparison. It's not a contest. It's not, Denny, whether you can be as good as me or as good as somebody else. It's all about your relationship with Him. It's all about your intimacy with Him. It's all about you knowing Him. There's no formula. There's no way to compare. There's no way you can get this from somebody else. I can't tell you what you need to do to come into greater intimacy with God. I'm having a hard time telling you that you need to do it. Because I'm not speaking to babies. I'm speaking to people that have given everything to God. But I'm telling you today, God wants more from you. He wants greater intimacy. He's not, it's this, by the way, listen, this is not a chastisement. This is not a correction. This is an invitation. You understand the difference?
Yes.
God is inviting us today. He's saying, I know you're dealing with some issues. I know that some of you are dealing with some things that have been, that you've had on your plate for a long time now. And you've struggled with it. And you've tried this and you've tried that. And you're still trying things. And those things aren't working. You've tried different treatments for the disease. But that's all they are. They're treatments. They're not a cure. All they do, by the world specializes in treatments now.
Yeah.
That's the entire pharmaceutical industry that's what they're all geared to do. They want to treat you. They want you to live as long as you can with some kind of a disease that they can sell you drugs that will treat that disease. That means they can just keep selling you over and over and over again. The world is treating things. They're not curing anything. It's by design. It's demonic. It's ugly. It's evil. Little children are being
Yes.
already drugged into this terrible, nightmarish thing, and we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
Part of the reason why some of you are dealing with anxiety is because that's going to be the biggest issue that we face as a culture, as a society.
That's right.
And we're going to need, children are literally being pummeled with it. It's being fed them by, in the schools and in everything that's happening is geared to cause emotional problems for people.
Yes.
And if you don't understand, if you don't think that, then you need to get your head out of the sand, because that is exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that some of you have been dealing with this because we're going to need people that have experience with it, that have
Yes,
fought
thank you,
against
Lord.
it,
Yes.
and understand it, because
Yes.
you're going to need to talk to some others that are going to be dealing with it at greater levels than what we can possibly understand.
So good. So true.
Yeah.
We are not going to have enough counselors to deal with this issue in the very near. I don't know that we have enough now.
That's right.
With everything that's going on in our world, with all the fear and all of the anxiety and all of the emotional stress and pressure that is being pumped into our classrooms and pumped into our children and pumped into our even adults, it's literally becoming almost unimaginable what's going to happen. And everything that is being done by the pharmaceutical industry, by the healthcare industry, by the government, by the media, by everybody that's involved in the treatment of it now, it's the only thing they're concerned about is making money off of it.
Yes.
And they want to just get as many people as they can sucked into this vicious, evil, wicked thing, and they are not interested in all in curing what's going on. But today, God is inviting you to go wash in the Jordan River. I know it's not a big thing. I know it's not public. I know nobody's going to be standing by cheering. I know it's not going to be a big, spectacular thing. He's not asking you to do something big. He's asking you, I need you to come in to relationship with me. this corruption is going to be a meltdown in the near future. You can't, you don't have to be prophetic to understand that.
That's true.
You can see it coming.
Yes.
You can see the destruction that is already being caused by the fact that there's, like, you can't build a culture, a society, a community on lies and deceit. And that's what we're trying to do. It's like we don't even pretend anymore. We accept the lies, the deceit, the corruption. It's right out in the front. It's no longer hidden. And you can see the end coming. You can see what's going to happen. And what I'm telling you is if you're tied, anything that you have connected into that, when all of that gets exposed, when all of that gets revealed for what it is, whatever you have tied into that is also going to be destroyed.
Yes.
It's going to be imperative for us as people of God to be solely trusting in God.
Yes. Yes.
Naaman's cure could only happen if he solely believed what the prophet told him. He had to let go of everything else. He had to realize that the only way he could be cured was through this lowly act of dipping himself in the Jordan River. All week long I've been asking God, I've been saying, what do people need to do? And he doesn't give me an answer. But what he keeps telling me over and over again is he's saying, I need my people. I need my people to seek me. I need my people to desire a more intimate relationship with me, to come into obedience with me, and to put the blinders on,
Yes.
and to seek my face. Naaman wants to pay the prophet. The prophet Elisha says, sorry, I can't take payment. You know why he wouldn't take payment? Because it would open up the door for Naaman to think that he somehow contributed to his own salvation. And what God is saying to us today is he's saying the only way you can have this is through me, through Jesus. There's no payment. There's nothing you can give. There was nothing Naaman could give the prophet that would pay for his own healing. There's something really deep in that. So Elisha sends Naaman away. And he says, I can't take payment. You can't pay for this. There's nothing you can do to earn this. Everything that God is inviting you to today is by his grace. Not because you're worth it. Not because you got something to bring. And I'm talking to some pretty talented people. I understand that, but God does not need your talent. He does not need your education. He does not need your intellect. He does not need your street smarts. He does not need all the things that you've learned in a lifetime. He has all of that. Just like Naaman. Elisha says, sorry, I can't take payment. Everything that God has given you is a free gift, and it only comes through grace. And he sends him away. But as he leaves, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, says, Elisha, I need to run to town for a minute. I got a thing I got to do. And he skips out, and he goes and chases Naaman down. If you know the story, you know that he chased Naaman down and said, Naaman, Elisha, my master, he changed his mind. He said, there's a couple guys coming in, a couple missionaries coming in from out of town, and they need some clothes, and they need a place to stay, they need some money. So he changed his mind, he said he wanted some of your money. And Naaman, he doesn't even know what's going on. He says, great, this is what I wanted to do anyway. And so he gives the prophet Gehazi some clothes, some money, and he sends him on his way. Gehazi thinks he's got the thing sewn up. He stops on his way home, takes all of the loot and puts it in his house, and he comes back to Elisha, and Elisha says to Gehazi, he says, where did you go? And Gehazi said, me? I didn't go nowhere. I've been here all along. I just was out watering the petunias or something. And I just, was out back. I wasn't doing nothing. I certainly wasn't going to Naaman and getting money from him. But Elisha calls him on it. He says, don't you know? He says, I saw where you went. I saw. He said, I was watching. He said, I could see when you talked to Naaman. I could see when he gave you the money. I could see when you took what wasn't supposed to be offered.
Yeah.
And as a result, the leprosy, instead of being banished, continued on in Gehazi. Now is not the time to make a name for yourself. Now is not the time to be looking for your own profit. Somebody said earlier that God is getting ready to clean house. That was you, right? God is getting ready to get rid of some of the corruption,
Yes.
of the deceit, of the evil that is plaguing our culture, our society. And it is spread deep,
Yes.
and it is spread wide.
Yes.
It's in every phase of our world. It's in our government, it's in our industry, it's in our churches, it's in every part of our world.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, listen to me, when God begins to clean out the corruption, you don't want to have any attachment to it. Because the part of it that you are attached to will be destroyed. And it might sound like God is being mean and vicious, and he's saying, oh, I need you to be more pure. I need you to be more holy. I need you to be more obedient. I need you to be more intimate with me. The only reason God is even inviting you into this is because he knows what's coming. He knows when the corruption starts to get destroyed, it's going to destroy everything that it touches. And he's inviting you to not be touched by it.
Yes. Yeah.
This is a hard truth today. That God is asking you, he's inviting you to let go of some of the things that you've been pursuing. He's inviting you to let go of your own ideas, your own way of thinking, your own healing remedies. And he's saying, I need you to be solely reliant on me.
Yes.
This is like telling somebody that's been in love for years, you need to be deeper in love. Because it feels like, well, I've been given all that I have to give. I don't have any more to give. I don't have any more that I can, you feel like, well, I've been trusting him. I've been totally reliant on God. But God is telling you today, you haven't. There's a deeper level. There's more intimacy that you can have if you're willing to pursue it. Are you willing to go to the Jordan River today? And to let God start to clean some things out. Things that there's no cure for. Things that you've tried everything else for. God's not angry with us. He's not angry with you. He's not mad at you. He's not chastising you. He's inviting you. He's inviting you today. He's saying, come deeper with me. Come find me. Come know my heart. You ever read the Psalms? Someday what you need to do is you need to read the entire book of Psalms from chapter 1 to chapter 150. You need to read it in one day. Set a couple hours aside, a half a day, whatever it takes you. If you're a fast reader or slow reader, I don't care. But someday do that. What you will find when you do that is you will see the heart of King David, because he wrote a lot of those Psalms. And what you'll see in there is you'll see that David was a man after God's own heart. He was a man's man. He was a big man in a big man's world. But you know what else you'll see? You'll see a desperation in David. You'll see a hunger and a desire for God that few men know.
Like no other, yeah.
That's what God is inviting you into today. He's inviting you to come and to know him deeper, to know him more, to know him better than you thought was possible. Part of the reason why you've been dealing with leprosy for a while now is because God is trying to create that hunger in you, that desire in you, to draw closer to him, to come into him even more than what you thought. God is inviting today. He's inviting you, Gary. He's inviting you, Jill. He's saying, come, know me. Know me. Come, know my heart. He's not mad, he's not angry, he's not correcting, he's inviting, he's saying, come deeper. You know, when Peter walked on the water, I don't know if Peter ever would have got out of the boat if it hadn't have been in the middle of a storm. You know, Jesus was out on the water, he was walking on the water, and I'm sure that didn't look all that safe. You know, if you're sitting in a boat that's floating on the water and Jesus is out there standing on the water, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm pretty happy to just stay in the boat.
Right.
But if the boat was in a storm and you thought the boat was going to sink, that would change the whole dynamic of the thing. And I wonder if that's not what prompted Peter to say, you know what, Jesus? Right now the boat doesn't look all that safe. The boat's taking on water, the waves are high, and the boat itself might sink. And we've been out here rowing in this boat for some time now, and we haven't been able to get any closer to land than what we were 4 hours ago. And I'm wondering if that ain't why Peter decided, you know what? As unsafe as that looks like out there, I'm getting out of the boat. Because when Peter began to sink, he didn't turn and try to get back to the boat. He turned to Jesus and he said, save me. And it could be that the reason you're in the storm is because God is saying, it's safer out here on the water with me. Walking on the water doesn't look all that safe if the boat looks safe and secure. But in the middle of a storm, all of a sudden Jesus can look even more tempting than what he already is. Holy Spirit.